You've felt it your entire life. You don't know what it is, but it's there. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window, or when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Wake up, Link.
The very first thing we experience in Breath of the Wild is a golden light shining through the darkness, and a disembodied voice telling Link to open his eyes and wake up. Of course, Link awakens into what's left of Hyrule, a desolate ruin laid to waste by the Great Calamity. He picks up the Sheikah slate and adventures through the wilderness, solving shrines and rescuing the corrupted divine beasts until eventually he takes on Calamity Ganon itself, freeing Princess Zelda and saving the Kingdom of Hyrule. But what if Link never woke up and never left the Shrine of Resurrection? What if the entirety of Breath of the Wild exists within a computer simulation? That's ridiculous, surely. There's no way that Hyrule is a simulation. Is there? A quick preface for this, I don't believe this theory is true, right? I don't believe the intent of the developers was to have the whole game story actually take place within a simulation. But this is a theory that I've seen pop up multiple times online, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here and have a look at what there is in Breath of the Wild that could be used as evidence to support the idea that Link's adventure to stop Calamity Ganon is nothing more than a computer simulation, because it's more interesting than you might think. Of course, Breath of the Wild obviously is actually a simulation. It's a video game. Hyrule doesn't actually exist. The game simulates Link's adventure through a world created by your Switch. But this isn't the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm not going to take things like drops in frame rate or render distances and use them as evidence for this theory. Obviously, these are technical limitations, not choices purposefully made by the developers. By simulation, I mean that Link is within a computer program that exists within the lore and world of Breath of the Wild. This idea sounds ridiculous, especially in a series so traditionally rooted in fantasy as Zelda. But if there was one group throughout the entirety of the Zelda timeline that probably would be able to create a realistic computer simulation of a world, it would be Breath of the Wild's ancient Sheikah, a race who developed their own computer systems like control towers, tablets, even fully automated war engines. They were an incredibly advanced civilization at the height of their powers, and their technology is far beyond anything else we see in the series. But could they actually create computer simulations? The Trial of the Sword is a bit of a mystery. It's accessed by returning the Master Sword to its pedestal in the Korok Forest, doing which teleports Link to a strange place resembling the interior of a shrine, but filled with natural flora like trees and monsters belonging to Ganon, which don't ordinarily appear in shrines. Everything from bokoblins to Hinoxes to Lynels appear within this trial, fought throughout many rooms with different environments: grasslands, waters, icy tundras, and volcanic pits. Unlike the sterile environment of the shrines, where everything within glows the pure blue or orange of properly functioning Sheikah tech, the Guardians found within the Trial of the Sword glow the ominous purple of Ganon's malice, indicating that they shouldn't be under the monk's control, and yet they're part of the trial. In fact, we know that the Trial of the Sword doesn't take place within Hyrule, or within a conventional shrine. The monks refer to it as an illusory realm of sacred mystery, where anything can happen, and that everything Link obtains there will be lost when he returns to the reality he knows. The Trial of the Sword isn't real. It's some kind of alternate reality created by or governed by the Sheikah, inside which Ganon's minions can be fought. This trial was built by the monks. Their sacred duty is to ensure that the hero gains the power necessary to combat the calamity in the world outside. By pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal inside the Trial of the Sword, Link returns to the exact spot in the Korok Forest where he pulled it. wearing the same armor and the same equipment as before. The Deku Tree informs him that his mind, body, and soul are now ready to wield the blade's power, and he's free to take on the Calamity now that he's returned to the real world. We see similar trials all throughout the second DLC pack too. The one-hit Obliterator trial takes place on the Great Plateau, though it's shrouded in a dark fog, and features enemies it normally doesn't, again including guardians that appear to be under Ganon's control. Link also takes on the Blight Ganons again with restricted equipment, also apparently taking place in illusory realms, this time created from the depths of his memories. The monk warns Link, "Do not dismiss this place as merely a world within your mind. The truth is much deeper than you know." So these illusory realms aren't within Link's mind, and there's a truth to this deeper than we know. That's ominous. It's entirely possible that these illusory realms are elaborate training simulations, built from the ground up with Sheikah technology to ensure that Link can wield the Master Sword's full potential, or prove himself worthy to pilot a divine beast. It really isn't a stretch to assume that these illusory realms built by the hyper-advanced Sheikah are some sort of computer simulations. But if the Sheikah have the technology to create realistic simulations with which to train Link, how do we know that Hyrule itself is actually Hyrule? What if the truth deeper than we know is that when Link leaves the illusory realms like the Blight battles or the Trial of the Sword, he remains in one still? Hyrule itself is just another level of Sheikah simulation, a top-level illusory realm designed to trial the hero. The strange blue liquid technology of the ancient Sheikah is at the core of so much of Breath of the Wild and its world. Even when Link's weapons break, we don't see them crumble or shatter into splinters of wood and steel. They explode into strange, bright blue shards that linger and flicker like an old television screen. It's not just the Sheikah weapons that explode this way. Anything from an old stick to the Master Sword itself will produce this strange effect when its durability hits 0. The game developers obviously wanted something recognizable and striking to tell the player, very clearly, that their weapon has shattered beyond repair and they must find a new one. But let's overthink this and ask, in universe, why do they explode into what looks like the bright blue energy used by the Sheikah? The effect is incredibly similar to when an ancient arrow hits its target, or when the force field surrounding a monk is broken. What if all weapons explode into what looks like shards of Sheikah energy because all weapons, royal broadswords, Korok leaves, thunderblades, the Master Sword itself, were created by the Sheikah? This would only be possible if one of two things were true. One, the Sheikah managed to create perfect replicas of all equipment, even things like leaves and sticks, and for some reason placed them around Hyrule, which is obviously ridiculous. Or number two, Hyrule isn't real, and the Breath of the Wild we see is all just a simulation, a larger illusory realm controlled by the Sheikah. The Sheikah appear to have a huge amount of control over Hyrule, even now, 10,000 years after they were banished by the king. Almost everything in Breath of the Wild serves as a trial for Link. Obviously there are the 120 shrines, more if you include DLC, that are scattered across the world and contain puzzles or combat challenges. These shrines are often found on the surface of Hyrule, where they've apparently sat for centuries, but just as often they're hidden below the ground, only revealing themselves when something changes on the surface. This can sometimes be something as simple as placing a Sheikah orb on a pedestal, which makes sense as a lock and key mechanism to access the shrine. But there are shrines revealed in ways that should be impossible for the Sheikah to have planned in the normal world, like using orbs from timeless relics like the ancient, culturally significant Gerudo heroines as keys, or having an entire island function as an elaborate trial where the hero loses his equipment. Hundreds of underground shrines, dozens of overworld shrine quests, 4 divine beasts, the labyrinthian dungeon below the Great Plateau, all designed solely to test this hero. They don't hold back either. These trials are tough, and there's a very high chance of Link dying at the hands of the Sheikah rather than Ganon. If the Sheikah had the ability to create simulations like the illusory realms, wouldn't it be far easier to create all of this within one big simulation where the Sheikah have full control over the world, and can create these incredibly dangerous trials without the risk of killing their hero? If we look at Breath of the Wild with this idea in mind, many oddities start to make sense. Not only the fact that all weapons explode into shards of blue energy when they break, but things like the way certain runes work. Both stasis and magnesis seem to project a grid onto the ground surface, like they're revealing the wire framework that supports a simulated world. In fact, just how powerful the Sheikah Slate actually is makes more sense if Hyrule is a simulation. It's capable of not only relatively advanced functions like taking photographs and instantly recognizing what's in them, but also unbelievably powerful feats like stopping the flow of time for living beings. Instead of just being a tiny computer, the slate might function as a controller, allowing Link to manipulate the simulation around him. Not only to play with the rules of physics here, but also to see weather forecasts and beam himself around the map. Perhaps the reason that the Master Sword itself breaks and runs out of energy in Breath of the Wild is because, even in the most realistic simulation, it isn't possible to replicate its divine power. The same could be said of the usually unbreakable Hylian shields, or, well, the fact that any weapon made of anything stronger than wood shatters after only a few swings. If the world is designed as one huge trial for a sleeping Link, then why wouldn't the weapons found here break quickly, forcing the hero to think on his feet? Looking at all of this, we see that not only would the Sheikah probably be capable of creating a simulation of Hyrule, they also have a reason to. As we know it, the monk's plan seems to rely on Link getting heavily injured during the Great Calamity, healing in the Shrine of Resurrection, and then waking without his memories into a series of trials to transform him into a hero. Instead, why wouldn't the Sheikah simply simulate Link's awakening and quest, all while he's asleep in the safety of the Shrine of Resurrection? Why not create a Hyrule filled with trials for Link to adventure through, a world filled with incredibly difficult, dangerous Sheikah trials with no risk of outright killing Link, so that when he eventually does wake into the real world, he'll already be the hero Hyrule needs? Compared to the overwhelming power of the ancient Sheikah, the Calamity Ganon we see doesn't seem particularly intimidating. We see a Sheikah monk in combat with the duel against Monk Mazkoshia, who makes use of unbelievable techniques like copying himself, firing guardian lasers from his mask, or growing into a giant. In comparison, the Calamity Ganon is a slow, lumbering pile of malice that relies on Sheikah tech for a physical body. Even its final form, Dark Beast Ganon, can be damaged by Sheikah weapons and feels more like a dying whimper than the final roar of the Calamity that it's supposed to be. Well, this all makes sense if you consider that this Ganon isn't actually Ganon. It's a simulation of the Calamity, created by the Sheikah. The Trial of the Sword and the Four Champions trials show that the Sheikah are capable of replicating facets of the Calamity within their illusory realms. Possessed guardians are one thing, but these trial realms contain splinters of Ganon himself, the Blights, supposedly created from Link's memories. If these realms can simulate fights against Ganon and his minions, it's possible that this isn't the real Calamity. Perhaps Link never woke up, and his mind exists within a Sheikah trial simulating his battle against the Calamity, training him as the true hero of Hyrule when he finally awakens. This way, Link would wake up and immediately be worthy and capable of wielding the Master Sword, claiming the Master Cycle 0, and eliminating Ganon. We've seen the Sheikah do some pretty questionable things for the greater good of Hyrule in the past, so I don't think that this would be beyond them. If it ensured Hyrule's safety, and meant that Link awoke from the Shrine of Resurrection already fully trained, then I think it's exactly what the Sheikah would do. It's terrifying to think that in a game all about exploration and freedom, Link might actually be trapped. So there's the idea that all of Hyrule, all of Breath of the Wild, is just a simulation created by the Sheikah to train Link. Like I said earlier, I don't think this theory is true. I don't think it was the intent of the developers, but once you introduce a group as powerful and as advanced as the Sheikah to the world, it becomes an interesting idea to explore. It's entirely within the realms of possibility that the ancient Sheikah could accomplish something like this if they tried, and although there's not heaps of evidence to support the idea, there's not a lot that disproves it either. The Sheikah can create illusory realms that could well be computer simulations, so who's to say that the entirety of Hyrule isn't one big top-level simulation? The main argument against this idea is that, although the world does reset after Ganon's defeat, just like you'd expect in a simulation designed to train Link, we do see an ending. We do see Link meet Zelda and begin a new life in Hyrule. Which, of course, could still be within a simulation, but this becomes more unlikely when we consider the game's upcoming sequel, which seems to be continuing the story of Calamity Ganon. The weapon break effect, while incredibly similar to some Sheikah effects, was probably chosen just because the bright blue is really striking, and it's a really important bit of information to get across to the player. And the fact that Hyrule is full of these trials that would be easier to build inside a simulation than in the real world doesn't really support the theory either, as we see that the shrines existed before the Calamity, in what we're presuming is the real world. It's hard to prove that Breath of the Wild's Hyrule isn't a simulation in the same way that it's hard to prove that our own world isn't. But unlike our worlds, we know who developed Breath of the Wild, and more likely than not, they didn't intend to tell a story about a computer simulation. But that's what's so great about Zelda theories. The world is so mysterious, with so many ideas only barely hinted at, that you can interpret it in so many different ways. I don't think Hyrule's a simulation. I don't think that's what the point of Breath of the Wild is, but it's a hell of a lot of fun to think about. I think it's safe to say that when Link steps out of the Shrine of Resurrection, he really does set foot into Hyrule, and not a Sheikah simulation. Doesn't he? Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like or subscribe if you haven't already for more Zelda content. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.